The hearing room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and stale nerves. Cameras buzzed. Tension oozed from every chair. It was spring in D.C., but the Oversight Committee chamber felt like a furnace. Emotions were high, and restraint was low. Marjorie Taylor Greene had already interrupted 3 witnesses. Her voice wasn't just loud, it pierced. She leaned over her mic like a boxer over a dazed opponent. "They're lying to you. The American people are being manipulated by this circus." Staffers glanced at each other, silently pleading for a pause. But none came. Not yet. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat still, hands folded. Not bored, not angry, just measured. Beside her, a young intern, barely 22, trembled slightly, her first hearing turning into a spectacle. Jasmine gently placed a hand on her shoulder. No words, just reassurance. Then Greene banged her fist. "And another thing," the intern flinched. And that's when Jasmine knew. This wasn't just political theater. It was trauma, televised. Somebody had to stop it, but not with louder shouting, not with another fight. She would wait. Not long, but long enough. The storm was still rising, but the silence that followed would be even louder. Perched in the gallery, behind thick glass and security, a young girl watched. Her name was Amina, 13, braids tucked neatly behind her ears. She had begged her mother to bring her to see her hero, not a singer, not an athlete, but Jasmine Crockett. She wanted to be a congresswoman too, to help, to speak. But what she saw instead made her stomach twist. Greene's voice rang out again, this time louder, accusing others of being enemies of the Constitution. Amina's mother leaned over and whispered, "It's not always like this. Sometimes they listen." But the girl's eyes were fixed on Jasmine, and Jasmine wasn't flinching, wasn't scribbling notes or looking frustrated. She was watching with a focus that felt ancient, like she'd lived this scene many times before. Jasmine's eyes briefly scanned the gallery and met Amina's, just for a second. A small nod. Amina's lips trembled. That nod wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't a show. It was a promise. And in that moment, the girl felt something return to her, something that Greene's shouting had nearly stolen. Hope. Down on the floor, Jasmine shifted in her seat. The moment was near. Greene's rant had stretched past the limit of time, reason, and even patience. The chair of the committee had tried, unsuccessfully, to gavel her down. One member muttered, "This is out of control." The room was cracking. And then, mid-sentence, mid-yell, Jasmine moved. Not loudly, not theatrically, just calmly leaned into her microphone, her voice low but clear. "You yell loudest when you know the least." The sentence floated across the room like smoke, thin but choking. Everything stopped. Greene froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound followed. Gasps rippled like a soft breeze. The cameras captured it all. Every blink, every stillness, every held breath. Even the marble walls seemed to lean in. For a moment, even time forgot to tick. Then Greene sat back, silent, deflated. Amina, up in the gallery, covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply returned to her seat, folded her hands again, and waited for the next witness. It wasn't a power move. It was a correction. The hearing continued, but everyone knew something had shifted. Not just in the room, but in the people watching across the country. Something sacred had been defended. The clip of Jasmine's calm rebuke hit social media before the hearing even ended. Within 10 minutes, it had over 2 million views. By noon, it was being played on every major news channel. But it wasn't just what Jasmine said. It was how she said it. Measured, steady, like truth itself had spoken. People around the country stopped what they were doing. In a coffee shop in Atlanta, a barista turned up the volume. In a hospital waiting room in Detroit, an exhausted nurse paused and whispered, "Did you hear that?" Marjorie Taylor Greene tried to regain control. She stammered, rolled her eyes, but the moment had passed. The room had chosen silence over shouting. And then came the split screen. On the left, Greene, face flushed, voice echoing like a storm in a glass jar. On the right, Crockett, calm, composed, a stillness that screamed more than words ever could. The internet didn't just cheer, it wept. Because for the first time in a long time, people saw something rare in politics. Not performance, but poise. Not noise, but truth. And for one girl named Amina in the gallery, it wasn't a moment. It was a calling. That night, Jasmine returned to her office late. The halls were nearly empty, but her desk light was still on. Waiting for her was a plain envelope. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper, wide-ruled like a school kid's. In shaky handwriting, it read, "My name is Amina. I watched you today. I want to be like you. When I heard you speak, I believed I could be more than scared. Thank you for protecting the room. You didn't know I was there, but I'll never forget you." No address, no return contact, just a name. Jasmine sank into her chair, reading the letter again and again. The world had praised her all day, analysts, celebrities, even former rivals. But none of it hit her like this. This wasn't politics. This was purpose. She stared out the window at the Capitol dome, glowing under a tired moon. And for a moment her eyes filled with quiet tears. She thought of every young girl like Amina, watching, listening, waiting for someone to show them how to speak without shouting. She didn't just end Greene's rant. She lit a path. The next morning, the media frenzy surged. News anchors debated, influencers praised, but some voices, the ones hiding behind fake profiles and cruel motives, struck back. A smear campaign began. Memes mocked her calmness as weak. Threads accused her of disrespect. Angry callers flooded her office, demanding apologies for embarrassing a fellow Republican. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she met quietly with her staff. No cameras, no rehearsed statements, just truth. "This was never about me," she said softly. "It's about what we allow in the room and what we don't." Still, the attacks cut deep. Her mother called crying, worried. Friends urged her to lay low, but Jasmine had seen something the others hadn't. Amina's eyes in the gallery, wide, fragile, brave. And she remembered her own childhood, watching Anita Hill on a grainy TV in a Texas living room. She remembered how that moment made her want to become more than a witness. She wasn't just defending herself now. She was standing for every girl who ever felt drowned out by the noise. Sometimes, silence isn't safe. But neither is pretending that shouting makes you right. Jasmine didn't sleep that night. The letter from Amina lay folded on her desk, next to untouched takeout and a flickering desk lamp. Then her phone buzzed. It was her father. He never called this late. "Baby," he said, his voice low. "Your mother and I watched today, twice." Jasmine held her breath. "You sounded like your grandmother," he whispered. "Remember how she used to speak at those school board meetings? Folks didn't like it, but they listened." Jasmine swallowed hard. Her grandmother, who marched in the 1960s, who once stood alone at a polling station for 12 hours because someone had to. She would have been proud of what you said today, not because it shut someone down, but because it lifted others up. Jasmine didn't realize she was crying until her father said, "You okay?" She smiled through the tears. "Yeah, Daddy, I needed to hear that." Outside, Washington slept uneasily, but inside that small office, a daughter remembered her roots and why the right words, at the right time, could still change a country. The next day, the public still praised Jasmine, but behind closed doors, tension brewed. A private meeting was called. Senior members, closed room, no press. Jasmine walked in and instantly felt it, the chill of political calculation. One congressman, older, gray-templed, avoided eye contact. Another, whom she'd campaigned with, leaned forward and said, "We appreciate your composure yesterday, but some donors are uneasy." Uneasy? "You embarrassed a colleague," someone added. "Even if she deserved it, it looked bad for all of us." Jasmine looked around the room. These weren't enemies. These were supposed to be allies. Then someone said the quiet part out loud. "You might want to tone it down for a while. Lay low. Let it pass." Her heart thudded, not from fear, but from deep disappointment. Tone it down? Amina's letter flashed in her mind. She stood slowly, hands firm on the table. If speaking up makes donors uneasy, maybe they're funding the wrong democracy. She walked out. She didn't raise her voice, didn't slam a door. But once again, the silence left behind spoke louder than any sound ever could. Across town, Amina sat on her twin bed, laptop glowing. She watched the clip again. Jasmine's voice. That sentence. That stillness. "You yell loudest when you know the least." Amina repeated it out loud, but the words caught in her throat. Stutter. It had haunted her since she was 5. Kids at school laughed. Teachers rushed her. Even family sometimes interrupted, thinking they were helping. But Jasmine didn't rush, didn't shout. She just was. Calm, powerful, steady. Amina stood in front of her mirror, fists clenched. You yell aloud." Tears welled. The words crumbled again. She turned away, ashamed. Then her mom entered, carrying something wrapped in cloth. "I found this in Grandma's chest," she said. "It's from the March on Washington, 1963. Inside was a button. Speak, even if your voice shakes." Amina clutched it. She turned back to the mirror, lifted her chin. You yell loudest." It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and she wasn't stopping now. Jasmine didn't wear heels that day. She wore flats, black, polished, and worn at the edges. They had belonged to her grandmother. The same shoes worn to walk 5 miles to the nearest polling station in East Texas, because the buses stopped running in black neighborhoods that day. Her grandmother never raised her voice at the polls, never shouted in the school board meetings she attended faithfully. But her words, when they came, never left a room unchanged. So Jasmine wore them now. As she walked the marble halls of the Capitol, media swirled around her. Microphones, flashbulbs, questions flung like arrows. But she kept walking, in her grandmother's shoes. Inside the committee room, the next hearing began. Jasmine took her seat, not as a viral clip, not as a trending name, but as a woman raised by generations who knew what silence cost and what real voice could build. Amina saw her on the live stream, and this time, the young girl didn't just watch. She reached for a pen. A handwritten note slid under Jasmine's office door that evening. It wasn't from a staffer, not from a supporter, not from Amina. It was from one of Greene's own party colleagues. "I didn't speak up yesterday, and I should have. What you said, it changed how I see all of this. I've been letting noise run the show, but not anymore." No name, no signature. But that letter meant something bigger than party or politics. It meant someone listened. Later in the hallway, a Capitol janitor stopped her. "I've been here 27 years. Never heard the room go that quiet. What you said? It stuck, ma'am." She smiled gently, thanked him, and walked away. But her chest tightened with emotion. Every person she passed, staffers, interns, even reporters, looked at her differently now, not like a politician, but like a compass. That night, She placed the note in her top drawer, next to Amina's letter. 2 pieces of paper, 2 hearts changed, and somewhere deep inside Jasmine, something began to stir. Not pride, but responsibility. This was never about winning a moment. It was about rebuilding trust, word by word. The school talent show was never meant to be political, but when Amina's name was called for the spoken word portion, no one expected what followed. She stepped to the mic, nervous, heart pounding. The auditorium was full of restless students, chattering parents, a few phones raised. She took a breath and spoke. "You yell loudest when you know the least," she began. Gasps rippled, but she kept going. Not every voice needs to be loud to be heard. Not every truth is a scream. Sometimes it's just steady, still, real. She stuttered slightly once, but didn't stop. By the time she reached her final line, the room was silent. "My voice may shake, but it's mine, and I will use it." Silence, then tears, then applause. Amina's mom clutched her chest, crying openly. Afterward, a teacher hugged her so tightly, Amina nearly lost her breath. "You just taught more in 3 minutes than I've done all year," the woman whispered. Backstage, a classmate handed her a folded paper. It read, "You made me want to speak too. Thank you." And for the first time in a long time, Amina believed she wasn't just watching change. She was change. 2 days after the hearing, a group gathered outside the Capitol. Not the usual type, not angry, not shouting. Dozens of young girls, most under 15, stood quietly in a circle. Each wore a shirt with the words, "Speak, even if your voice shakes." In the center stood Amina, holding a handmade sign. It read, "Thank you, Congresswoman Crockett, for protecting the room." Reporters swarmed. Cameras clicked. Jasmine hadn't expected this. She stepped outside unannounced. When the crowd spotted her, a hush fell, and then spontaneous applause. Not loud, not forced, just grateful. Amina stepped forward. She didn't stutter. "You made space for us, so we made space for each other." Jasmine knelt and hugged her. No speeches, no mics, just 2 people. One who had lived the storm, and one who had finally learned how to stand in it. Inside, someone watching through a window whispered to a staffer, "She didn't come out here to be seen." The staffer replied, "Exactly. That's why we're seeing her now." And in the eyes of every girl outside, Jasmine wasn't a politician anymore. She was proof. That evening, Jasmine's team received devastating news. The janitor who had stopped her in the hallway, Mr. Rollins, had passed away suddenly. Heart failure. No warning, no time. The Capitol community was shaken. Jasmine attended the memorial the next day, dressed in all black, clutching a single lily. There were no cameras here, no headlines, just quiet mourning. Mr. Rollins' daughter stood at the front, reading from his journal. March 3rd, heard something real in the chamber today. A voice I trust. Makes me believe the place can still be saved. Jasmine couldn't hold back the tears. After the service, the daughter approached her. "I just want you to know," she said, "my dad didn't trust many of y'all, but he trusted you." Jasmine nodded, her voice caught in her throat. When she returned to the Capitol, she passed his usual hallway. His mop bucket was still there, silent, still. She left the lily inside it. A chair had been left empty in the world, but somehow Jasmine knew. His spirit would keep walking those halls. With her. 3 days later, Jasmine opened her mail. A familiar envelope. Child's handwriting. Amina again. But this time, it wasn't a thank you. "Congresswoman, someone bullied me today. Said my voice didn't matter. I wanted to scream back, but I remembered you didn't yell. So I didn't. I just walked away. I kept walking, but it still hurt. Is silence always strength? Because today, it felt like weakness. Jasmine dropped the letter. She stared at the ceiling, eyes filling. Then slowly, she sat at her desk and wrote back. Amina, silence is not weakness. It is wisdom that waits. It is peace that listens. But it's okay to cry. It's okay to speak. And sometimes it's okay to walk away, so long as you never walk alone. The truth is, even I get scared. But fear doesn't mean failure. It means we still care. One day you'll find your moment, and when you do, speak it in your voice, even if it shakes. She mailed the letter herself. That night, she cried harder than she had in years, because being strong for others didn't mean she didn't still break too. But she broke with purpose, and that was its own kind of strength. The committee hearing room was quiet now. Weeks had passed since the moment that changed everything. Greene had returned, louder than ever, but something had shifted. Her shouts no longer echoed. Her words landed, then vanished, like thunder with no storm behind it. Jasmine, meanwhile, remained steady. She wasn't chasing cameras. She was mentoring interns, meeting with teachers, writing legislation that didn't trend on Twitter but saved homes, classrooms, and jobs. But one morning, before the next session, she stood in the mirror of the Capitol's empty restroom, hands braced on the sink. Her own reflection stared back. "You good?" she whispered to herself. No cameras, no script, just a woman holding too many hearts in her hands. She remembered Amina, Mr. Rollins, the unsigned letter, the protest, the silence that had followed her words. She adjusted her pin, took one breath, and stepped back out. That day, she didn't speak during the hearing. She didn't have to. Every time Greene raised her voice, heads turned, but eyes drifted back to Jasmine. Because people had learned something new. Sometimes, the loudest voice isn't the one with the mic. It's the one you remember. It was May. The cherry blossoms were gone, and the city was hot with summer's arrival. The House Oversight Committee met again, this time for a youth justice bill. Halfway through the testimony, a young girl stood in the public gallery, nervously holding a folder. The committee chair paused. "Young lady?" I was invited," she said, her voice shaking. "I sent a letter to Congresswoman Crockett." Gasps fluttered through the room. Jasmine stood and smiled gently. "Yes, that's Amina." The chair nodded. "She may speak." Amina stepped forward, pulled a page from her folder and read. "Some people say kids shouldn't speak in big rooms. But I say rooms should grow big enough to hear kids. I used to stutter. Now I speak because I saw a woman sit in silence and somehow say everything." She paused, looked directly at Jasmine and said, "You taught me to speak. Now I'll never stop." The room stood in stunned silence. Tears rolled down cheeks, from lobbyists to lawmakers. For once no one clapped, because the silence that followed was sacred. That night, Jasmine sat alone in her office again. The Capitol lights blinked outside her window like distant stars. She pulled out 2 envelopes, one from Amina, one from the janitor's daughter. Then she reached for her journal, the one no one knew she kept. She wrote, "Change isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly, holds a hand, and teaches someone to stay standing." We didn't end anything that day in the hearing room. We started something. And I'll carry it, every day, for as long as I'm here. A knock at the door. It was her chief of staff. "Ma'am, there's a crowd outside." "Protest?" "No," he smiled. "A candlelight vigil. For truth." She stepped outside and saw it. Thousands. Candles flickering. Signs held high. "Protect the room. Let her speak." We remember the silence. Jasmine didn't wave. She didn't speak. She just placed her hand on her heart. And in that moment, The city didn't feel broken. It felt held. Dear viewers, if Jasmine Crockett's courage moved you, if Amina's bravery touched you, if the silence in that room brought you to tears, please like this video, comment below. I heard her. Subscribe, not just for stories, but for reminders that quiet truth still lives. Let's protect the room. Let's honor the silence. And let's never stop listening.